Hello, my name is Charlene Garcia Sims, and I'm the Genealogy and Special Collections librarian here at Rawlings. And today we have a very well-known Denver author, Angel Vigil, with us. Last week we did a tribute to Rudolfo Anaya, known as the godfather of Chicano literature. And we talked about Rudolfo the man, Rudolfo the author. And this week we're going to talk about his writings, which is probably what he would really have wanted us to talk about. And so he has written many books and articles but we are only going to concentrate probably on 3 books. And of course, the first one is going to be Me Ultima. But before we do that, Angel, can you define Chicano literature again and maybe talk a little bit more about the meaning of mestizo and mestizaje, which is a central theme in Rodolfo's books and a lot of Chicano literature?
Absolutely. And then reading his books and then listening to last week I'd mentioned on YouTube, there's quite a few interviews with him and everything. And then you had asked me what were some of his constant themes. And then one of his constant themes, of course, is the importance of culture, the culture that he grew up in, the Hispano culture of New Mexico, northern New Mexico. And then the other part of it is he was very deliberate to always use the word Chicano. And then he was also in his writings used the word mestizo. And then the reason for that is because if you read his first 3 books, they're all about the journey toward who he was and his understanding of who he was, starting as a little boy. And then his second book about when they moved to Albuquerque, which is the town I'm from, and they moved to Bareilles, which is the neighborhood in Albuquerque that I'm actually from. So I feel a deep connection to his stories quite a bit because what he's talking about are areas and people who I lived with also. So I identify very personally with his stories. And then the last book was a story about him being sick, and he'd been paralyzed for a portion of his childhood. But the idea of Chicano, if you listen to his talks, and the idea of the mestizo was very, very important to him. And then it was important to him as he grew into himself, and his literature from that time on reflected that worldview of himself in the world. And then I have a picture here that's going to illustrate it. This is off of a mural here in Denver by a very well-known and respected muralist in Denver, Emmanuel Martinez. And this is the mestizo face, is what it is. And this was very, very strong icon imagery during the Chicano movement in its birth in the 1960s, which is when Rudolfo Anaya came into his own adulthood and came into his awareness, well, what type of stories am I going to write about when I'm writing about myself and my culture? And so here you see it graphically displayed. It's 3 faces, 2 on the side and 1 coming forward. And the idea of Chicano is people of Mexican ancestry, cultural connection, living in the United States, born in the United States centric, not Mexican nationals, not living in Mexico, not having Mexico as primary reference. Our primary reference as Chicanos is the United States, the country we're born in, the country we live in. But Chicano for a long time was a derogatory, pejorative term. And then so part of the Chicano movement was to reclaim that as a source of cultural pride and a source of artistic empowerment. So what it is here, it's literally the idea is that we were a new race of people. And I know Rudolfo Anaya also believed this because I heard him talk about it. We're a mix. The Spanish and the Indian have formed a new race of people, the mestizo, Spanish and Indian heritage both. And then Rudolfo Anaya, he would write about his discovery and immersion of his Indian part of himself, the Indio part of himself. And then so that's a little bit about Chicano, why the term is important. Chicano literature is literature written by Chicano authors who use that as the beginning of their story. Who I am, I'm this new person, Spanish, Indian, the third face seat looking forward into the future. That's the mestizo or the Chicano face. So that's why he's considered the godfather of Chicano literature. He's the first person who really took that mantle on and was deliberate and aggressive about using it as his personal and artistic identification.
Thank you. And so now, tell us about Me Ultima. I know you have this is one of the first one.
I'm especially proud that you also have the white cover. I tell people all the time, hey, I have the white cover book. That means I'm an OG, original gangster of Me Ultima, because
Yeah.
bought it. God, when did I buy it? Middle of the 1970s. It's published in 72. Here's what happened with Me Ultima. No one wanted to publish it. You got to start from there. No one wanted to publish it. He sent it to all the major publishers. No one wanted to publish it. And the reason they didn't want to publish it is use Spanglish, code switching. There's Spanish language in the book. And the other thing is they're literally uninterested in what they would call ethnic or cultural literature. They didn't think there was any market for it. They didn't think there's any, the subtext is there's no value to it, right? Why would anyone want stories about those people? Why would anyone want to read a story about that part of the world? So he was rejected. He had the almost stereotypic story of all authors, all the rejection letters. So, but he loved his book. He knew it was important, and so he just kept looking and looking and looking. And then he likes to tell the story. He found a small little independent publisher. And I know Charlene, he later on became quite a champion of small independent publishers. I think that's why I loved you and Ed so much, because that's what you were. You had the El Escritorio, your own small independent publishing company. And Quinto Sol out in San Francisco decided, yes, we'll publish it. And they actually gave him his first big award as an author. They gave him like Author of the Year award, the best Hispanic literature book of the year. Was this book right here, Me Ultima. And it tells a story of, it's a coming of age story is what it is. And, people have written dissertations about it and everything, but at the heart of it is a little boy, Rudolfo, growing up in New Mexico, having La Grande, Ultima, as the closest soul person towards him, even more than his parents. And the book's about the tension between his mother and his father. The other reason I relate to his book is my mom. I actually was in the seminary, St. Francis de Sales Seminary in Oklahoma City, studying for the diocesan priesthood, because as he writes in the book from the mother's perspective, a special blessing comes to a family who has a priest in the family. So my mom, minute I came out, that guy's going to be a priest, went all the way to the seminary. So that also resonated very powerful with me. The mom wanted him to be a priest. And then I grew up in a family of vaqueros in the eastern plains of New Mexico. So I really understood the vaquero perspective of the father and the tension between the desires of the father and the mother. And then underneath it is the story of Ultima, who is a curandera. And then, of course, the casting of that is the use of remedios or natural herbs or natural healings or spiritual powers. There's a term in Latin American literature called magical realism, and Me Ultima has been described as a book having aspects of magical realism in it. It's a realistic story about a little boy on the eastern plains of New Mexico, but magical things happen, right? And then Ultima had this owl, right? Owl that represented her spirit and her soul. And when the owl died, Ultima dies also. So it's a powerful story, multidimensional, but what it really talks about is Chicano people in New Mexico is what the book's really about. And he liked to say that he didn't make up anybody. He just wrote about where he grew up, and he wrote about the people in his life. And that was the beginning of his work as a Chicano artist.
Okay, and what did you think about the religion? There seemed like there was like Antonio was in a struggle with the Catholic religion, and then like his indigenous side. What did you gather from
Well,
that?
you know what? This is the idea of Spain Catholic, right? Indio.
Mm-hmm.
And Indio can be called pagan almost, because they have a lot of gods. They believe in earth spirits. The mountain has a spirit. The river has a spirit. The eagle has a spirit. There's a supernatural aspect to the Indio religion. And the other great tension in the book is between the Catholic religion and its tenets. And the other great tension in the book is that his Indio side in the world of supernatural magic, if you want to call it, right? Superstition, if you want to be negative about it, but the idea that there's a spirit in the world. So the conflict between those two things, and then it's very, very, very clear through several incidents in the book, and then the struggles Antonio, the young boy, is having. He does. One of the characters is an atheist and is presented quite positively in the book, actually, doesn't believe God answers people's prayers, actually, because Antonio prays, nothing happens, right? There's a big section in there when he takes his first communion. He expects the clouds to open and the heavenly bells to ring and the light to come down on him. Nothing. And then he's troubled by that as a young child. He's very troubled that he thought magic would happen when he took first communion, and nothing happened. On the other hand, he's so moved by the way Ultima talks to him and the way Ultima heals people and the way Ultima is connected to the natural world. He's very attracted to that, and that actually makes him feel better about himself and about life. And the Catholic Church continues to give him nothing. So that's another profound conflict in the book between Catholic traditional religion and the Indio world of the supernatural and the spiritual. And that's another reason people resonate with that book so much, because I think so many people feel the conflicts that little boy felt all the time, trying to reconcile so many different aspects of life and the spirit and religion and what are you going to believe in and what happens to good and bad people. One of the big problems he has is none of the bad people get punished. And that troubles him quite a bit. He thinks bad people, we were talking about this before we went on air, a child thinks bad people should be punished and not get away with being bad. And in the book, so many bad people do bad things and nothing happens to them. And that troubles him quite a bit. He thinks if there's a just God, like the Catholic Church, they should be punished and nothing happens to him. So he's a young boy in great conflict. But fortunately, the world of Ultima is extremely positive for him and makes him feel good about himself and about life. And he sees more value in the Indio spiritual life than he does in the Catholic religion.
Yeah, I love it when they invite Ultima to come and live with them, and which is part of our culture. When we do that, I know that when I grew up very strict Catholic with my grandma. All she had to do was give us the eye, and we would behave, in church. And I was 60 before I even questioned, anything. And I wish I had this book to read. But did you have a favorite part of the book?
Hey, that's going to sound weird. Yes, I do. I was telling you about this. I loved when Ultima died. Just the poetic way she talked to the little boy, because he's all sad and don't die and don't leave me and everything, And then Rudolfo Anaya has such beautiful language in the way she speaks to him at the end. So it's like poetry. It's the most beautiful lyrical poetry. And it's so life affirming about her spirit's going to leave, but her spirit will continue in you. Everywhere you look, you'll see me. So I just love the poetry of her death and how supportive she was of a little boy being so heartbroken about her death. And then he's resolved about it. He actually goes and buries the owl and continues on to live. And so I think the resolution of that was really good. That wasn't my favorite part of the book.
And the owl, tell us a little bit about the owl, because the owl she moved in, and the owl moved in a way.
Sometimes I'm talking to a college student. Sometimes I'm invited to talk to some college students, and then so I can give them a little bit more adult talk about things and everything. And I ask them, I bring up this idea about superstition and belief and science and reality and everything. And I say, and we're talking about Bless Me Ultima as a book, and I tell them preposterous things happen in it. right? Just preposterous things. This owl, once Ultima moves in, the owl moves in. The owl's always around her and everything, you know. And then that powerful scene when the evil man is getting ready to do evil, and the owl comes down and attacks him and everything, you know. And then the fact that when the man shoots the owl, Ultima dies also. That's all like preposterous magic. Like, how does that owl thing even happen? And that's part of the Native American Indio thing, is these animals have spirits, and human beings can be connected to those animal spirits in a way that shouldn't make any sense. And then I tell people all the time, people believe in magic all the time. I see people walking around with Peyton Manning's jersey on in Denver when he was playing for the Broncos, thinking that that's going to help the Broncos win. Now I see him walking around with Von Miller's jersey, thinking that's going to help the Broncos win. People do special rituals. Everything's got to be just right before the big game happens with the Broncos, because that's going to make the Broncos win. And so I would tell them, hey, we're a superstition species. We do all sorts of things thinking it's going to affect our life and everything. So why wouldn't an owl be part of that way human beings need to relate to the environment around them? Some people dismiss the owl as a superstition, but I know people that believe that stuff pretty deeply, and you can't question faith and belief after a while. Yeah.
I like that example about the Broncos.
I pointed at a guy. I said, "You were involved in New Jersey. Why is that? Because you think that's going to help them win on Sunday. Don't you think that's kind of stupid?" He got all sheepish. "No, I think it's going to help him win." I said, "Well, then don't make fun of the owl."
I know they would make fun of that, but not the Broncos. So one of my favorite parts of the book was, I think his first grade teacher's name was Mrs. Mestes, and he came to school not knowing any English. How could he learn to read in, you know? I mean, he knew Spanish. That was his language. So how could he come to school and immediately learn to read English? So she spent extra time with him, and this is, I feel that teachers are so important, especially, you know, elementary teachers, when, you know, they give good experiences to children, and she taught him, she paid attention to him and taught him to slowly read. So that was one of my favorite parts of it. But I found something that Rodolfo said that the great breakthrough in finding his voice as a writer occurred in an evening when he was writing late at night. He was struggling to find a way to get the novel to come together. And then he says, "I felt something behind me and turned, and there is this old woman dressed in black, and she asked me what I was doing. Well, I'm trying to write about my childhood, you know, about growing up in this small town." And she said, "Well, you will never get it right until you put me in it." I said, "Well, who are you?" And she said, "Ultima." This was an epiphany that Rodolfo believed came from his subconscious to provide him a mentor and his spiritual guide to the world of his Native American experience. And I loved when I read that, you know, because I know that he told me that it took him 6 years to write the book, you know, and then, you know, a few years to publish it. But I just loved the spiritual side of him, you know, where he said this.
And you know, he was what I like about him. He wasn't afraid to talk about that. He wasn't afraid to write about that. He wasn't afraid to create a character like Ultima and say, "Well, Ultima came and visited me at my house one day and gave me strength to write this book," and everything. Writers will talk about that quite often. They'll say, "Well, the character started talking to me." And of course, that sounds like craziness, you know, but writers do. I think it's a subconscious welling up inside of yourself, in that the welling up of that speaks to it. And then Rodolfo, clearly, the instance he described to you is true for him. That was something that happened to him.
I know, it was. I thought it was just beautiful, you know, for him to have discovered Ultima in that manner. So I want to get, you know, there are so many books that he wrote, and you can find them, you know, just by typing his name in the books he wrote. But one of the least known is A Chicano in China.
Oh, I want you to talk about that, because who would have thought a Chicano would go to China and write a book about it?
And this is a limited edition. I have one of the few, and I found it at
Yeah.
Moby Dickens. I think that's the name of the store in
Mhm.
Taos, and I'm so glad I have it. And actually, I found an article about, where he talks about Chicano in China. And he stated, in May 1984, I embarked on a journey to China, a pilgrimage that turned out to be one of the most incredible journeys I have ever taken. I had traveled abroad before, but there was something singular about China, something special that prompted me to keep a journal of my daily impressions. He further stated that he needed to know about his indigenous side and the Asiatic people who thousands of years ago wandered over the Bering Strait into the Americas. It's a wonderful article where he compares the dragon with Quetzalcoatl.
Mhm.
And he states there that in the palace grounds, the dragon abounds, carved into roofs, carved into bronze. Something about the vast courtyards between buildings reminds me of Teotihuacan in Mexico. The walls, the smell, the sprigs of grass and weeds on the ground. The dragon is everywhere, the flaming Quetzalcoatl of Mexico. The face of the fierce dragon looks out from walls, from gargoyles, from decorative pieces, almost exactly as the serpent head in the pyramids of Mexico. This is my first clue. This is the door I seek. The dragon means supreme power, the emperor's wisdom. Quetzalcoatl means supreme power. In what dream in Asia millions of years ago did he have his beginning? And he talks about the faces of the people is written, the migrations from Asia crossing the Bering Strait, down into the Americas, bringing their dragon dreams. On the face of our guide, Mrs. Wang, I see a woman from Laguna Pueblo, New Mexico. And so many of my relatives, including myself, look Asian, look indigenous. And so it was so funny that he thinks that their guide looked like a lady from Laguna Pueblo in New Mexico. And so I just love it. And then, of course, he did write Lord of the Dawn, the legend of Quetzalcoatl, and it's really an interesting book, too. But I'm going to get back to you, and let's talk about Albuquerque. And I have the two spellings with the extra R, Albuquerque and Albuquerque. And this one here. So I want you to talk about it. And why is it misspelled?
It's history. That's the only thing you can call it. It's just history. It's
not misspelled. Yeah.
It's also racism. It's also ignorance. It's also colonialism. It's also cultural dominance. It's such a complicated mix of how the R got taken out. Albuquerque is one of the oldest towns in the United States. It was founded in 1706. At that time, the northern part of, all of the Southwest was part of Mexico. That's all you can say about it. Mexico didn't lose that land until 1848. And then so what happened is, it's called New Spain, right? It's called New Spain. It wasn't called Mexico yet. It's called New Spain. And there were these estancias, there were these grants, and the Spanish were themselves colonizing their northern territories. And then so in 1598, Juan de Oñate, he goes through El Paso, has what I consider to be not the Pilgrim thing, but the very first Thanksgiving in the New World actually was by Juan de Oñate in 1598. So they're moving up the Camino Real up through the Rio Grande Valley and everything, and they set up a village, and that's all you can call it. That's even exaggerating it in scope, because everything was so tiny in scale in those days, and had to have a name. So they had to have a name of this little village on the Rio Grande River there in the northern provinces of New Spain. And then so the territorial governor, if you want to use that type of language about it, of that part of New Spain, he decided to try to gain favor with the viceroy of New Spain. And the viceroy of New Spain had an honorary title, and the honorary title was the Duke of Albuquerque. And Albuquerque is actually a little bitty town. By tiny, I mean 5,000-6,000 people, very, very little bitty town in the province of Extremadura in Spain. And Extremadura is in the middle western part of Spain. Extremadura is actually kind of famous because almost all the conquistadores that came over to the New World came from Extremadura. And one of my characters I do is El Conquistador. So there's a lot of cultural reasons why all the conquistadores came from Extremadura. But Albuquerque is a little bitty town in Extremadura, right next to, close to Portugal border, because you have Spain and then you have Portugal on the side over here like this. So Extremadura would be on the western middle part of what now we call the country Spain, but it was Castile in those days. And there was a little bitty town there called Albuquerque, and it had an R in the second syllable of the word Albuquerque. And then, so that's it. That's the name of the town. The Spanish word has the letter R in it. And the Duke of Albuquerque was the viceroy of New Spain. So the man in charge of naming this little bitty village on the northern provinces of New Spain wanted to gain favor with the viceroy of New Spain and said, well, I'm going to name it after the boss, if you want to look at it like that, right? And then maybe he'll throw me a couple good things. And then, so originally it had ALBURQUE. And then when the Anglos moved in, right, and then Anglos started living in New Spain, later in Mexico and everything, they didn't care about the original Spanish language. They didn't care about the original Spanish spelling and everything. They actually misspelled it, dropped the R, and didn't care to correct it. And then that's how it now, the way you spell it nowadays is actually a misspelling of the original version of the name. I know a lot of people look at the Rudolfo Anaya's book Albuquerque and wonder why he misspelled the name Albuquerque, but it's the reverse of that. The way it's correct is the misspelling. That was the original. And then and of course that's just conjecture on my part, but knowing, if you read enough about Rudolfo, I think it's coming from his Chicano sentiment. No, we're going to spell it the original way, the way it was there before all these Anglos came in, bastardized it, misspelled it, didn't care about it, didn't care to correct it. And because they became the dominant culture in New Mexico, the misspelling is the name that took. So on purpose, he put the R back in the title of his book. I think that whole dynamic's interesting that he did that.
I think it's really neat because when I first saw it, I thought, oh, is that misspelled? And I thought Albuquerque was an indigenous word because it sounds more indigenous than Spanish. And then I found out that no, it was, what you said, the viceroy's name was Albuquerque. So yeah, it is kind of funny when someone says that's misspelled. No, it isn't.
No, it's not.
So in the book, I love the book. I just really like it. And in there is one section about La Matanza that is so realistic, to me, because I grew up every September, going through this ritual of La Matanza. And I know this is really special to you because you and I shared almost the same experience as if we had grown up in the same town. So tell me your experience with La Matanza and why you loved this portion so much.
Charlene, it's not like you and I grew up in the same town. It's like you and I grew up in the same family. We could be brothers.
That's true.
Because every time you bring up something, I go, yeah, that happened to me too. But that's what it's like reading his books. So I love the idea that his books have become universal, and people who didn't lead our life, which overlapped in his books, can read his books and get a sense of the power of his vision about life on Earth. But I have a picture here to show you about the Matanza. The Matanza, and Rudolfo Anaya, I was listening to him talk one day, and someone asked him a question. I mentioned this last time. You write about culture and how important culture is and everything. So we'll keep all the big stuff, but there's just too many small things. We can't keep everything alive. It's just some of the stuff's going to be lost. And then he countered that quite directly. He said, there's no part of cultural activity that is too small, that is not worth keeping. So he felt you got to keep all of it if you're going to have your culture vibrant and accessible to you and have something to pass on. So the Matanza is one of that. And he wrote about it because he grew up experiencing it. I grew up experiencing it. You grew up experiencing it. I actually have a picture of it. I'm gonna hold it up here. Hope let me get it kind of like this. Hope you can see it real clearly. Um, I'll describe it. There's my grandfather. There's my Tio Joe, and they have a home. This is on the farm in Springer where I grew up. They on the Eastern Plains. They have a homemade little rack. It's what they have on it. And if you look at it, there's 3 pigs being gutted on it. And then my grandfather here, this man right, let me see if I can't get my finger going like this. This man right here, that's my grandfather. In his hand is a knife, a long bladed knife. This is my Tio Joe over here working on it. That little boy right there is me. That little boy right there is me. That's my cousin Simi right there. His name was Simon, but we called him Simi. So that's cousin Simi, Simon, and that is me right there. That's my father right behind me there. And then we're at Matanza. We're butchering 3 pigs, and I have a very clear memory of that day. Someone took the. I tell kids in school about this, and they always get all freaked out about it. And I always tell them, no, it's just what happened. One of the men, and actually I'm a little boy like Rudolfo was 6 years old on the farm. They were butchering some pigs there. And that's going to be their food for the winter, actually. That's very important that they get that done the right way. So one of the men took one of the stomach of one of the pigs and washed it out and blew it up like a balloon. That memory has stuck with me my whole life because I must have been a little boy with eyes about this big. Oh my gosh. But to him, he was just full. It just picked it up and called me over. Watch this. He blew it up. So that's my memory of the Matanza. But this is a beautiful picture of that cultural tradition of the butchering of the pigs to provide food for the family.
I know my memory of La Matanza is my Tio Paul Trujillo. He was the one that killed the pig, and he everybody would gather around her. They were going to butcher the pig, but it couldn't be done until my Tio Paul got there. So he would get there in his truck, and all the audience would part ways and let him walk through. And he had a nail, though. He needed a nail and and some kind of a mallet, and he knew exactly where to hit the pig because they felt that the pig had to die instantly so that there was no suffering. And we used every part of the pig. The only thing we didn't use is the ears. We used the feet, we used the stomach, we used everything, but we didn't use the ears. I don't know why, but when I was in Spain and I went to a tapas bar, there was orejas de puerco. But even though I had passed up the opportunity when I was a child, I didn't eat them. But I do remember that kept us. They used the lard for cooking, but also to make soap, lye soap.
They get ash from the fire and mix it in with the lard and make soap out of that. Yeah. Some things that we would think would be gross food were delicacies: bone marrow, brains, pig's feet. And then I'd ask my mom, especially, how come you make food like that? She says, well, nowadays you'd call us poor, but back then, all we had was the farm. There was no store to go to. Everything we grew on the farm was the only food that we had, and that's why we had to eat all of it. Yeah.
I know, and the chicharrones. Let's not forget
don't forget that part.
With potatoes. But so I have a couple of questions. Why is it so important to publish more Chicano literature or ethnic literature in general?
The reason it's important that, and this is what Rudolfo Anaya did, and why he deserves the title of the Godfather of Chicano literature. He was someone who told the world, our stories are equal to any stories in the world. Our lives are equal to any lives in the world. The experiences that we have as a people are as important as any experiences in the world. And something like the Matanza, the butchering of the pigs and everything, one, it's providing food and everything, but also it's a family ritual. It's a community ritual. It helps define group cohesion. It helps define individual identity. And by sharing the experiences of your culture, you enrich the world culture. And then it'd be like saying, well, why do we read Russian literature? Well, what do Russian stories have to do with me? Well, it's important. Why do we read Shakespeare? Why are there stories about a little island over there called England? What do those stories have to teach me about my life? No, every culture is a reflection of the human experience, and every culture should be on the world stage. And then, so someone like Rudolfo Anaya writing a book like Me Ultima, he almost throws down the gauntlet and challenges the world to recognize Chicano people as a people with a story to tell that will enrich people's understanding of the human story worldwide, and that we would have an equal place in the pantheon of world literature to any literature in the world. And then, so he was the first one really to hit it big, if you want to look at it like that. And then generations, myself included, of authors have followed after him, telling our stories, the Chicano stories. And then my niche is very particular, the stories of the Hispanic Southwest.
Yeah. I love the fact that Me Ultima is one of the 10 most challenged books. And you know what happens to challenged books? Everybody wants to read
Everyone
them.
wants to read it.
I know. I want to, when I write my book, I want it to be challenged. I don't want it to be banned, but I want it to be challenged because it will be a moneymaker. A moneymaker. I have one last question. How can we get publishers to take ethnic literature seriously, written by ethnic authors? Because it just seems like, the big publishers just won't take them. Sometimes, they will send them to a subsidiary, which is fine, but why won't they, after all these years, take more of this literature seriously to publish?
My answer is a hard one. One is called business, and the other one's called racism, systemic racism. That's why my answer is a hard one. One of my publishers, when you went into his office to talk to him about your book and everything, sign the contract, do all that, there was a sign outside his book, outside his office, and you had to read it before you went into his office. And it said, the purpose of a business is to make money. And when I went in, it shocked me, because I thought the purpose of a book business was to make art, right? The literature. He said, no, that's not the purpose of my business, like all book businesses, is to make money. And the only reason we're going to publish your book is because we think it's going to sell, and we think we're going to make some money, and you'll get a little money, we'll make a lot of money. That's the whole purpose of all this. It's not art, it's to make money. And we're in the business of selling books. So part of it is a cold calculus on their part. Is there a market for these books? Are we going to sell enough of these books? And I know in the book industry nowadays, the collapse of what's called the middle category, right? You're going to have your niche books, cooking books, memoirs, a book that might break through in a niche. And then you're going to have your giant big sellers that might be made into a movie, be optioned into a movie. Those are the only two categories. The mid-range author, no one's interested in those books anymore, because publishers don't think they'll sell enough books. And then the idea of systemic racism is really floating around, our new awareness of it now, especially in 2020, is these systems that are designed that there's only one story people are going to be interested in, and those are stories from the dominant culture, which would be the Anglo culture in the United States. Those are the stories that are going to sell. And any other stories, they're not going to sell enough for a publisher to be interested in him. And that's why Rudolfo was so supportive of the small independent publishers, because he felt, in his own experience, they're the only ones going to be interested in publishing these smaller sales books, until he became so famous that then he started. But it took 20 years for a hardback copy of Bless Me Ultima to come out, right? It was in paperback for almost 20 years.
20 years. It really did.
So that's an example. He'd sold hundreds of thousands of copies before a large book publisher decided, well, we're going to make a lot of money. But if Quinto Sol had not decided 20 years earlier to bring that book out, the growth of Chicano literature would have been delayed at least a full generation. So it's a problematic question for anyone trying to any author on any book is going to have trouble getting it published. And then so any author writing within a niche little category, ethnic or cultural literature, has to find a publisher with enough belief in the book to think that it's going to sell copies. That's the calculus of it.
Thank you. It makes me easier to understand, but it's kind of sad because I have learned so much from, people like Sherman Alexie and, of course, Toni Morrison and, Alice Walker and Amy Tan, and all this, the ethnic literature. I learned so much about their cultures, and I want to learn about all cultures. So I'm hoping that the future maybe will hold more ethnic literature, even if it's self-published or published by small publishers. Eventually it grows like Rodolfo's book did. So thank you very much. I'm going to close, but would you like to say anything, Alice, at this point?
Yes, I would. We've spent a lot of time talking about Bless Me Ultima. Start with this book, all right? I invite you to come into the world of Chicano literature and Rudolfo Anaya. Start with this book. Absolutely start with this book. I have 5 pages of his books here, and his plays and his children's books and everything. Don't stop with Bless Me Ultima. Go to some of his other books. He wrote 16 novels. His first books were a trilogy about him growing up. Ended up with, we got here Tortuga, but it had Bless Me Ultima, Heart of Aslan, Tortuga, the trilogy. He has a Sunny Baca stories. They're mystery detective stories, if that's a genre that you like quite a bit. He has at least 10 children's books that would be wonderful books to start with. So come into the world of Rudolfo Anaya, come into the world of Chicano literature. It's a rich, rich, rich world. You will be yourself connected to the human experience by reading those books. Start with Bless Me Ultima and go to some of his other books. I invite you in. He invited you in.
Yeah, one of the children's book is how hollyhocks came to New Mexico. Another one is about, how chili peppers. So thank you so much. And all these books, we have them for checkout in the library. You can get them by curb service. You can come in and get them, but get them and, check them out and read them. So thank you, Angel. I hope that people who saw the 2 tributes that we did last week and today go online and read about Rodolfo and listen to some of his conversations. He has that wonderful voice and what I call that New Mexico twang, soft, strong, resilient, that manito accent. So please go to our webpage where you can find Rodolfo's speech when he spoke at Hogue Hall at the university in 1994, and where he advises not to leave your culture at the doorstep as he had to do, and to encourage children to always bring their culture, into the schoolroom, not leave it at the doorstep as he was forced to do. So please continue listening to our virtual programs and have a good evening. And again, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you very much.